Before we started this podcast, Ruchir and I had to quickly Google what some of those words meant. And Ruchir, be honest, you didn't know what Adinayam meant and you didn't know what Sanhita meant.
From a little bit that I've read, there are some improvements, as in providing victims an update within 90 days, community service as a potential punishment.
Power in the hands of the enforcement directorate, in the hands of policing authorities without proper checks and balances, that is definitely not a sign of a progressive criminal law jurisdiction. So
whether it is the Labour Party or the Lib Dems or the Green Party, all of whom are quite leaning towards pro-climate policies, I think is a big win.
Hi, and welcome to episode 22 of the India Dialogue. We're so glad you're here. My name is Ruchir. I'm joined by my co hosts Manu and Mitali as always. Manu is an advocate and a lawyer. He has his own law practice and is a spokesperson for DMK. Mitali is known for her time at CNBC. She's a journalist. She's written a book. I'm Ruchir. I'm the CEO at Distributed Energy and the chair at School of Policy and Governance. Every week, we unpack issues on India and focus on things that matter. Every now and then, we take a detour of looking at foreign policy from an Indian perspective. And the first topic today will be about the UK elections. Manu will take us through that. Manu?
yeah, I think something that we've always, trying to understand a little bit better after the long Indian election season is how are elections sort of different in other countries, and none better than the sort of the mother of the parliamentary democratic system, the United Kingdom. They had the election on the 4th of July. They declared their results on the same night, notwithstanding that it's completely paper ballots in one day. So, there's different models. So, I think it'd be interesting to understand what's really happened. But let me start by sort of giving people an overview of what came out of it. I think it was very much along expected lines. Labour took Narendra Modi's campaign seriously, so they got 400 par. They got 410. The ruling Conservative Party, led by Rishi Sunak, I think after being in power for 14 years, came to their all-time low of 131 seats. The other sort of major gains were seen for Liberal Democrats. I think they did very well with about 61 seats. And the Reform Party, which I think my first question to Mitali is going to be on that. The Reform Party, they picked up 13 seats. It's led by somebody who's known as a Trump ally. I don't even know people in the United States who want to associate so closely with Donald Trump, but Nigel Farage, is seen as populist leader number one in the UK. So, Mitali, what's your take, generally speaking, but also on the Reform Party and the repercussions from their gains?
Yeah. It's been an incredible sort of 24 hours, Manu. There's really and this is the sort of the magic of democracy, which you must have seen in action when India went to elections. But there's literally been an electric energy, and you can sense it in people looking for change. Everyone is talking about it. When you're going to the grocery store or wherever, there's just everyone's talking about it. I think largely on expected lines, but maybe some nuances that I can, point to. As you say, starting with the Conservatives, I mean, it was expected that they would not do well at all, but I think it really bears underlining. I mean, this is the worst performance in the history of this party, and that's 190 years of history that we're talking about. So, this kind of annihilation that they have faced is really a telling sign of what the last 14 years have come to mean for people. For Labour as well, they've done really well. As you said, they've crossed the 400 mark. Um, maybe a little bit up and down in terms of seats, but it's an overwhelming majority. I think a couple of surprises are how well the Liberal Democrats have done, the Lib Dems as they're referred to here, and in many places that have traditionally been conservative strongholds, you will see that it's the Liberal Democrat vote that has done much better, and in that sense, I think there's been some fairly adept tactical approaches here between the Labour Party and the Lib Dems, in terms of the fact that there were seats where the Lib Dems did well, and you almost get the sense that that was kind of structured to be that way. I think the Reform Party, to my mind, at this point is getting inadequate attention, but that is understandable because of the person behind it, which is Nigel Farage. I don't think it's as high as 13 seats. It's probably fewer. It's a telling comment, though, Manu and Ruchir, in terms of the seats that he has won in, and many of these seats, if you go back, a couple of years to the Brexit era, are the same seats that voted overwhelmingly to exit when Britain went to vote on that issue. So I think it's a telling comment about a part of the voting electorate that is feeling excluded. And I think the lesson for any winning party would be, how do we engage with this population? Why is it that they don't feel heard? So I think the Reform Party sort of signifies a far right leaning. But I would say at this point, I think they're getting too much attention, even in the British media. The big win for me is actually the Green Party. 4 seats have been won by them, and at this point, whatever we have by way of the age grouping, in any case, the younger generation did not vote in very large numbers. Voter turnout itself was actually quite low, at about 60%, lowest since 2001. But the fact that overwhelmingly it is a younger majority voting group that is voting in the Green Party, and the fact that as a whole, now in the parliament, you have a large chunk, whether it's liberal, whether it is the Labour Party or the Lib Dems or the Green Party, all of whom are quite leaning towards pro climate policies, I think is a big win, Manu. And two sort of final notes. One, what really stood out for me was the grace that from both leaders, from Rishi Sunak, the outgoing prime minister, and Keir Starmer, the incoming prime minister, both of whom sort of complemented each other. One called the other, very hardworking and public serving politician. And for Keir Starmer to stand up and say that he recognized that Rishi Sunak was not just the first Asian prime minister, or prime minister of Asian origin, but the extra effort that it took, I think that says a lot, to recognize what it is to not be the majority and yet be holding that position. And the second little tidbit for me is that I got to vote. And, this was really interesting for me, because you guys know how difficult it was for me to vote in India, despite trying my best. So the way it was constructed in the UK is that if you are a resident in the UK and you're a part of the Commonwealth of Nations, you can actually vote. And it was as simple as that. I put in all my details. I got a letter from the council saying, okay, can you upload this, and I uploaded it. I got a letter from them in a few days saying, all good, you can vote. I wasn't sure where my polling station was, so I wrote to the council, and I got a reply back in like 30 minutes saying, confirmed, you're on the voters list. This is the place you need to go and vote. And it happened. I mean, it was like it really, it was great, but it also pained my heart so much that this wasn't something we could get done in the Indian electoral system. And I think that was the other tidbit I wanted to share with you all. But what about you two? Like, what stood out for you?
Just to clarify, Mitali, I think, yeah, sorry, I meant to say Reform got 14% vote share,
Yeah.
which was substantial, and not 14 seats. I do want to correct that. Thank you for pointing it out, though. And of course, I think the fact that conservatives, after 14 years, they've done really well, and I think most people did think that Rishi Sunak came at a very difficult time, after a disastrous Liz Truss blitzkrieg prime ministerial time, and Liz Truss herself lost her seat. So that's quite telling, and it clearly was a vote for change in many ways. But I think your experience is fantastic. The fact that if you're a member of the Commonwealth, which thank you for reminding us that it still exists, and we are all members of Commonwealth, we should feel good about that. And if you're living there, you can go vote. That's fantastic. Ruchir, you wanted to sort of give us your thoughts on this, on how
I,
you saw this.
I'm so amazed by the last comment from Mitali. I didn't know you could vote by being a resident. This is I mean, so many people can take advantage of the influencing UK political elections. Anyway, on the most interesting thing I found is they have 650 seats, and one person represents 73,000 people as opposed to 2.6 million in India. So I think, anyway, our parliament would be so huge. I have to do the maths. One comment you've consistently made, Madhu, on a serious note, is usually parties in power lose as opposed to the opposition winning. And I think this is what it felt like. I was looking at the vote share, and the Labour vote share hasn't really increased. It's gone like up by 1.7%, but the Tory vote share has really dropped, and and that's basically the big difference. I think the Lib Dem thing is surprising, but one of the things I find is in elections where people are unhappy with the incumbents, they tend to unite behind some opposition force. One of the things from my brief time in Australian politics, I found, especially with someone like the Greens, was um, a big chunk of people, say in the left of Labour, were there because they believed that Labour could get elected and Greens could never really form government. And I think in many ways you see that kind of organizing where a lot of people in the left move towards Labour because they actually believe that Labour can form government. So I think that is what we are seeing play out here, which is that people just want to make sure that Labour gets in power.
Ruchir, I just wanted to quickly say on the point that you're making. It was um, it was anger at a level that one has not seen before in the UK elections. So this adage is completely true. Elections are for a government to lose and not an opposition to win. In the run up to the elections, Ipsos ran a whole lot of polls and surveys, and the closest survey that was run to the elections. So an overwhelming 73 to 75% of their respondents saying the number one reason they were voting was to kick the Tories out. I think this is less sort of a mandate for Starmer and more a mandate against what has been 14 years of just rank destruction. So, I just wanted to make that point that this was so much about I'll vote for anyone, but I won't let these guys stay in power. I think that was sort of an overriding emotion.
Can I just point out one more thing, Ruchir? So I just pulled out the exit poll data, okay, and go back a few weeks to Indian exit poll data. The exit poll data said 410 for Labour, and Labour got 412. It said 131 for the Conservative Party got 121. Literally, a few percent, right? I mean, 3%. That literally. Again, Scottish National Party, they said 10, they got 9. Just go back to the Indian polling ecosystem, right? Be it, pre-election polls, exit polls, how far they were off the mark. I mean, this is the reason I think, I think we've done this in numerous episodes. We've sort of, had a laugh at the expense of the poor pollsters. But, this is how an exit poll should be. It should be close. I mean, matter of 3%, 5% is I think acceptable. But I think this is what, maybe if anybody is watching, if you're a pollster and you're watching, thank you for watching to our podcast. But you should strive to, I think these are the standards one must
And
strive for.
Manu, shocker of shockers, this exit poll was shared. It was a shared exit poll across Sky News, BBC, a couple of other properties. So, the media, large media organizations are putting their money and weight behind one respected poll and exit survey, and that's the one they stand by. I think so many lessons for exit polls.
So many lessons. Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, one trend I'm sort of optimistic about, and I wonder if it's just cyclical or if things are changing in the world, is a few years ago, I mean, the Scottish National Party like won all of the Scotland seats, um, and then Brexit happened in 2020. So obviously, there was an extremely strong nationalist sentiment just before COVID, right? And since COVID, in some ways either it's a reflection of the UK economy and where they are now and how like the economy has been trending downwards, or it's a reflection of people wanting, in UK's case, a more globalized economy. So that is a really, I mean, I don't know whether that is a cyclical thing for the UK, or if it is a reflection of uh, world wanting to be connected again.
Ruchi, so I looked at this. I looked at this. The Scottish National Party had, I think, two or three really good elections where they were getting 30s and 40s out of the 50 odd seats in Scotland. And of course, the last election, they sort of peaked. What I'm given to believe, and Mitali, maybe you want to weigh in, is they had some sort of a big leadership turmoil. They had leaders quitting, and there was an investigation into the party's finances last year. So again, there were issues. I think not just movement of votes from the Scottish National Party, to in favor of Labour. Not as simple as that. I think there's a lot more going on in that party, and I don't know if we can be very quick to say this is the end of the Scottish National Party and it's a decline and whatnot, because that party was formed more around Scottish sort of independence and autonomy and all of those. So, Zari, do you have a view on
Yeah,
where
no, no,
Sweden?
you're absolutely right, Manu. It's sort of been through a lot of internal turmoil, and there was a very high nationalist leaning, as Ruchir said a couple of years back. But I think because of the amount of internal turmoil they've gone through this time round, it was almost a cleansing for the party. I think two things strike out from some of the elections we've seen so far. One, that there is certainly vote for change, and you are seeing that. You did see that in India. You are probably seeing that. We may not agree with it, but you are seeing it in countries like France, which are tilting right. There are several other countries across the EU that are also making that choice, for right or wrong, but we have to accept the fact that there is a change in sentiment in terms of what currently exists as the status quo. And I think right on top for me is the fact that uh, a public serving government is back on the agenda. It is not something to sort of scoff at anymore, where the voting electorate is disenfranchised, it is disenchanted, and it is saying, what are you doing for my welfare? This certainly came through in the Indian elections, as we've discussed so many times, where people stood up and said, hey, what about the lack of jobs? Hey, what about the fact that costs are rising? And that is certainly the case in Britain. I think what people were feeling so acutely, is that the younger generation was standing in a space where they look back and they was doing so far worse than their previous generations. Generally the expectation is what, that generation after generation there's some improvement, financial, educational. And here we were in a situation where there was a cost of living crisis, more and more people leaning into food banks, more and more people finding it difficult to cut rent and to cut costs. And I think that really came through, and that's becoming sort of an accountability force, saying, hey, we're voting you in, and we need for you to take care of us. The NHS has been a huge story. So I think that element really stood out for me.
So true. I really didn't have much more to add, but just to say that it's really refreshing that these were the issues that I think even in the last debate when Sunak and Starmer faced off, a lot of the questions were around housing, around jobs, and around the National Health Service and how it was difficult to get appointments. Now, again, we have to sort of contextualize this because the UK there is only a public health care system, right? And everybody goes to that, even if you have a fever or if you have something very serious, and the queues are quite long. Usually, that's what we hear. So I think Labour really has a lot to fix in speak in terms of welfare, in terms of public health and housing and so on. But I don't think that's the last of the international election season. We have a really interesting United States election season brewing. In a couple of months, it will prime, and in November we will have elections there, and in October we will have Sri Lanka elections, the presidential elections there. If you remember, go back a few years, the economic distress and turmoil, with the sitting president literally, escaping, fleeing the country, and people taking over the presidential palace. I think Sri Lanka will be an interesting one to watch too. But I'll give the last
I,
word to Ruchir.
No, I mean, it's not a word, it's really a question. And I'm curious about what both of you think, especially from an Indian perspective. How should we think about the UK election? To me, at least, like, this is more an image rather than substance comment, but the image is like that the UK is a diminishing power. Obviously, it is a reflection of India's, like, strong diaspora, that we had a person of Indian origin become prime minister. So obviously we monitored that quite closely, and as a result, like, so much of the UK was on our television in the last few years. But I'm curious, how do you think about, like, a Labour-led relationship with India, and how India should think about its relationship with UK in the new government? Mitali, do you want to take that?
Okay, I will briefly, and then I'd love to hear Manu's thoughts as well. I think if you looked at it purely from an economic lens, Ruchir, there's been a long drawn conversation around a free trade agreement. It's currently in round number 14 in terms of negotiations, so it's clearly not something that's gone through efficiently. It's got a lot of big items in it, security, defense, health, IT, you name it. But India has a reputation of, frankly, not being very easy to navigate when it comes to FTAs, and a lot of the other countries are sort of once bitten, twice shy. The UK itself acknowledges that it's not easy to get this done. So the hope will be that that gets signed off, but I wouldn't hold my breath for a quick and easy resolution. The second point is that I think visas will become a sticking point. Of course, Sunak, as honorable as his tenure might have been, it also had a lot of dark phases. People like Preeti Patel and Suella Braverman, both of Indian origin, ran the most toxic anti-immigration agenda, down to challenging human rights and saying, put them on a plane to Rwanda, stop the boats. All of this came from this outgoing government. But I think there is bipartisan consensus about the fact that immigration needs to be stemmed. I think increasingly this government, like the US is talking about, will tilt towards outstanding global talent rather than, the lower hanging fruit of semi-skilled worker visas and dependent visas and things like that. I think that will become a problem. And the final point I'll make is that, even though Labour was pitted to get a high vote from the ethnic minority, which can be constituted as South Asian, which is Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi. They have lost significantly in all Muslim majority constituencies, and a lot of this is to do with Starmer's own approach on Israel and Gaza. So I think, given that, it would be interesting for me to see how this incoming government approaches the Modi government, that has had, as we know, a very, very toxic sort of narrative itself going into the elections. And this time, the world was watching. It was watching all the speeches, and it was hearing all the commentary. So I'd be curious to see at what level they want to be very chummy, or whether they want to be a bit wary of each other. India is a huge economy. One wants in on it. There's no two ways about that. But how they navigate that, I think, changes, because it's not the same Modi, and it's not the same Keir Starmer. So that's my take on it. Manu, what would you watch?
So India is a big economy, and just to sort of add, it's also seen as a huge market, right? They want to tap into, and that is the free trade agreement. And I think India has rightly been advised to put a premium on its own market, and not, and negotiate hard. We saw how close Australia thought they were to negotiating the free trade agreement, and they made Australia wait. And it was not until a former Australian Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, who was made special envoy for the trade agreement. Literally, a former prime minister just spent, I don't know, X months, let us say 3 or 6 or 9, nobody knows, but he spent that time just navigating through these the little knots that were tied up. So the free trade agreement, though Sunak tried his best, and better other conservative leaders did their bit too. I think the Labour government will expedite that. That's what they've promised to, and I don't see a great change in their approach to India. I think they do see India as a valuable partner, and to be fair, just going back to the Rishi Sunak years, I think maybe just as a note, I think while I think we all sort of appreciate the fact that he was um, a British Asian or an Asian British person to first become prime minister, and migrants, regardless of you come through whichever route, the asylum route or through a different formal professional route, it's pretty difficult to be a first second generation migrant family in any circumstances, and I think he's done extremely well. But I don't think one should assume that, and this is true for Sunak as much as it was for Obama, right? Because it was the Obama presidency, I don't think you can assume that it's like an African American presidency, right? It's an African American sort of White House, and everything will happen, in furtherance of that. Ultimately, when they become president, prime ministers, constitutional office holders, I think they see their responsibility to everyone, and you can't become the prime minister or president of a let us say a white majority country without sort of actually bringing their vote in. So ultimately, I do believe the prime ministers and presidents reflect the majority of the country, roughly. And even when they are from a minority race or community or linguistic group. So I think, like I said, like while I appreciate Sunak for being, for having done what he's done, and I think he is. The last thing I wanted to say is, with all these other elections, with the Western elections, usually what happens is once they lead a party to an election and the party loses, they almost inevitably resign, right? It's almost a given. Whereas it's something that we've not seen at all in our political setup. I wonder why that is, and maybe that's a discussion for another day when we have much less items on the agenda.
One word, finances. I think. Anyway, great. We'll switch to India. Come back home and discuss criminal law reform. We have new laws aiming to modernize and replace colonial era laws with three new acts effective from the 1st of July 2024. Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, Bharatiya Nagarik Suraksha Sanhita, and Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam. Um, why don't we start off by just laying the groundwork, Manu? Why don't you explain to us what these three key changes mean?
So to be very honest, before we started this podcast, Ruchir and I had to quickly Google what some of those words meant. And Ruchir, be honest, you didn't know what Adhinayam meant, and you didn't know what Sanhita meant. Neither did I. No, no water off my back because I'm in Tamil Nadu. But
No, I was thinking when I was looking at those names, like it's exclusionary in nature,
yeah,
also, just the terminology even.
Ruchir announced, Sanhita means collection. And I was like, what do you mean
I
collection?
got
What are
it.
they collecting? But see, that's the first issue. So we'll start with that. So one of the first legal objections is that Article 348 of the Constitution of India, specifically, the heading of the article is language to be used in Supreme Court, High Courts, and for acts or bills. And it specifically says that uh, the authoritative texts of the bills to be introduced and our acts passed by parliament shall be in the English language, right? So that is why, go back to I mean, sorry, not go back to, like, think of the United States, right? So many laws are made, but they're given very interesting names, after the people who've inspired that law, and so on and so forth. I like that culture to some extent, but in India, the constitution says they all have to be, the text has to be, shall be in English. um, so it's a weird argument because this came before the Madras High Court recently, and somebody has filed a petition saying these three laws are first and foremost violative of Article 348, so they should be struck down on that ground. So, in response, the union government says, no, no, see, the word Sanhita is written in English. We didn't use the Sa in Hita, the Hindi or Hindustani text. So again, very odd sort of reasoning. And yeah, so the discrimination, or rather the confusion, really begins from there. One of the constitutional law professors, Tarunab Ketan from London School of Economics, he did like a plagiarism check. He put in the old law and the new law through that, what universities academics have, like the plagiarism checker, and he found that almost 85% of the laws are the same. It's just reordering of numbers, right? So really, what we say, right, old wine new bottle sort of a thing. So then why did we undertake this big exercise to, if it is just reordering the numbers? Numbers are very important because in lawyers terms, in court parlance, most court proceedings, if you watch for a while, they refer to numbers. They say section 482 of CRPC petition. People know the famous 420 IPC, which is cheating, or 302 Indian Penal Code, which is murder, and so on, right? But again, these are how lawyers have dealt with. So again, changing the numbers means an entire generation of, or few generations of lawyers will have to restudy everything. That's not too bad, but the problems start from there. If 80-85% of the text and the language and the articulation is the same, why are you just reordering the numbers, right? So the only understanding I have of this is this sort of stream of decolonializing, or uncolonializing of Indian um, ethos, Indian laws, and so on. So the thinking goes that, well, the British gave us the Indian Penal Code, the British gave us the Evidence Act and the Code for Criminal Procedure. So we must now, because we are now a 75-year-old independent country, we must have our own laws and whatnot. But again, it fails the very first test, right? You copied pasted 80-85% of what the British left you with. So you've only added about 10% or value. But like I said, I don't think, having said all of this, it is anybody's case that you cannot update, or you should not update the laws. Laws require constant changes, especially today in the field of digital evidence, right? So a lot of people are relying on WhatsApp chats, emails, phone recordings to prove their case. Now there's a huge problem procedurally to bring that evidence into court. Our laws are generally used to, evidence in the form of, see this knife, see this blood stain, see this doctor's report, so many places they've stabbed this person, so on and so forth. But beyond that, when you talk about all these digital evidence, it is still a huge challenge to bring them into court, and it should not be that difficult. So instead of actually working with, what changes will help us improve, quicken our judicial processes, I think, we have sort of gone back to fighting the British, and changing the names of the laws, and changing the sections and whatnot. Some of the other minor sort of, I guess, objections, right, have been that they've dropped section 377. Now, section 377, if you remember, had multiple aspects. One was bestiality. So the whole section was non-natural sexual offenses. So bestiality, and amongst other things, homosexual relations were also criminalized. So in 2018, the Supreme Court in Avtej Johar actually, decriminalized that, but all other offenses stayed. So some people have said, but then, what if there is a rape in a homosexual relationship, right? So then there is no law to today penalize that. Of course, the answer would be, then make the other rape law gender neutral. But of course, we haven't done that. So there are those sorts of issues in it, in particular, and a lot of niggling issues, teething issues. But I would say predominantly this is the major issue: the fact that it is in a strange language, very difficult to explain to people like me, and the fact that a lot of it is still very much the same. I don't think it is truly modernized the criminal laws in the country. So I would actually not call these substantial reforms at all. They are, iterations, right? And we do that. We do that. I think the criminal procedure code went through iterations. The Evidence Act has, gone through changes to include digital evidence and so on. But the fact that they've rechanged the names, they've brought in new numbers. I think this is like a little bit of an unnecessary proceeding. But I'm keen to hear what non-lawyers think of this, because I only talk to lawyers about these things.
So two quick questions to you, Manu. One, that the opposition is demanding another discussion about this, but this is something that the parliament cleared in December. So uh, what do you think will be sort of rediscussed or debated now? And the second, I was reading that the Karnataka Assembly is talking about making 23, 25 some amendments in these proposed laws and then accepting it. What are the options before state governments for these three laws, if there are parts, as you say, that they don't agree with, or parts that are not the best cultural fit?
So, firstly, when the laws were passed, they were passed in ruckus. So I think the opposition has always said that there hasn't been clear, cogent, elaborate discussion. Though they were sent to a committee which had opposition members too, and a lot of them provided dissent notes. They weren't discussed and deliberated in Parliament, and of course, with the new mandate for the NDA government, I think they sort of took a moral line to say that you discuss it again and tell us why these are important and whatnot. The second point is more interesting, Mitali, and I think it's something that you rightly pointed out, which is that criminal laws are part of the concurrent list under the seventh schedule. So there's the union list, state list, and the concurrent list. Concurrent list, both the union parliament and the state legislature can both make amendments to. Now, yes, even in the past, many states have carried out amendments to the criminal procedure code and the penal code and so on and so forth. So very much every state, essentially any state assembly, can carry out any number of changes to this, right, as is their want. Of course, there is one another test to it, because as if the state changes it and the parliament has held a particular position, the state amendment is contrary or what is called repugnant to the original one, then it goes to the president of India, who will decide on repugnancy. And yeah, and that's a no brainer which way the president will decide. But you understand, so unless it is repugnant, they can. So for example, if suddenly one of the states were to pass a law saying this offense is no longer an offense, then definitely it would be declared to be repugnant, and it would require the president to give her assent before it is notified in the gazette as law. So I don't know the amendments that Karnataka is bringing in per se, but they are well within their constitutional authority to bringing any changes, and other states may also do that. Um, but yeah, this is. I mean, does it seem like why are lawyers getting so worked up about something which just seems like for a person who's on the other side, they may just think, look, it's law is a law. Whether you say I'm charged with section 308 or 444 doesn't really matter, right? What matters is how many years am I looking at. So what's the
But
big hoo-ha?
from a little bit that I've read, there are some improvements, as in around providing victims an update within 90 days, community service as a potential punishment, which we didn't have before. There's also something around, if you've received a punishment and you're a first time criminal and it's not a major crime, then you can get bail after serving one third of your time. So it sounds like some aspects of our legal system are better in that it will be a little lighter on sentencing and so on. Is that right, Manu?
Yeah, there are some changes, I'll tell you, and a lot of these changes, Ruchir, are court inspired or judicial inspired changes, because the courts were there were areas of vacuum, and the courts were sort of giving some advice saying, okay, if somebody's already served half their term, then they should be let out and so on. This other interesting uh, offense, which is not in the old laws but is now a punishable offense under the new penal code, is that, which is the Nyaya Sanhita, is what is called promise to marry. Okay, for the longest time, I still remember in my for my second or third year law exam, the criminal law exam, there was a question saying, is promise to marry a crime or not? Because the old penal code did not say. Promise to marry is you are in a relationship or not, but you have a sexual intercourse with a person, promising them of marriage. So a lot of people who were in premarital relationships, once the relationship sort of went sour, there would be cases, saying, usually from the woman's side, saying that, this person, there was a promise to marry. Now, it was not there in the earlier law. How police would deal with it is they would put two sections. One is the cheating section called 417 IPC, and the rape section 376, right? It was ridiculous because at that time there would have been consent, so it's not per se rape, but the police would say, argue in court, but consent was obtained on the basis of a promise which is not true, or which was not delivered right in the future. And that was a very sort of a gray area to argue, but by and large most courts did not convict people, because they would say, look, doesn't it's very difficult to prove that a person had given a promise to marry, right? Nobody writes it on a piece of paper and signs it, for example. There's no video recording, there is no witnesses and so on. So by and large, so now that has been made a offense, and what I think may happen is a lot of younger people, will go and file cases along those lines after sort of relationships that have not worked out. So there are those kinds of issues, which I noticed. But yeah, above and beyond that, I do agree, Ruchir. I think there are some useful improvements, but then again, like I said, there are also like negative, I guess what I would call little bit excessive police power giving changes. So earlier law said, once every 15 days the remand must be extended. So if the police arrest you, they take you to a magistrate within one day. Okay, and the magistrate only had the capacity to remand you for 14 days. So the 15th day, police bring you back to the magistrate, and the magistrate kept extending. So this is the case for Kejriwal, everyone, etc. Okay, now they've made that 90 days. So like the magistrate's power increases, and initially within the first 15 days was the only slot in which police can ask for police custody, which means they take you under their custody, so you're not in jail for 4 days, 5 days. So last week the CBI have asked for police custody of Arvind Kejriwal. So that means they can take you to their police station and interrogate you there. Okay, so that's where we find most of the sort of the coercion, the undue influence, the threats, the intimidation happens under police custody. And that used to be in the first 15 days. Now the law says you can ask for it anytime in the first 90 days, right? So again, there's, I think, greater policing powers. Again, it reeks of a state which says, no, no, we need to arm our police with more and more powers. And the lesson for me from working in criminal law for the last 2 years has just been that power in the hands of the enforcement directorate, in the hands of policing authorities, without proper checks and balances, is always will tend to lead to many problems. And we see so many people in jail for long years, and that is definitely not a sign of a progressive criminal law jurisdiction. So I don't think specifically it is helping us reform the system in that sense. The community service, I agree, is a great provision. In fact, courts were doing that anyway, but it's good to have it now written in law. Somebody can claim, say, no, no, can I do community service instead of X or Y? So I think that makes sense. But
Clearly a complex one, and probably not resolved quite yet. I'm watching the clock, and we have to get Richard on a plane. So I'm going to move to have you heard. And my spidey sense tells me there's a lot of sports on Have You Heard today. Richard, do
I,
you want to start?
yeah, no cricket because everyone's hurt. But actually, I like this is not my heavy hurt, but I was really surprised it didn't click until now, and it's so obvious that Biden and Trump are older than India. I just, I just realized that now. I was like, what? Yeah. Anyway, um, my have you heard is a self promotion. I chair the School of Policy and Governance, which supports this podcast, and there is diploma, a master's level diploma in climate change, starting in October 2024. It's in partnership with Manipal University, and it's going to be a 6-month program until April, run on weekends, largely online. One of the things I have found is so much of our education has been limited to environmental sciences that there's not many high quality programs on climate change. And obviously, environmental sciences focuses on one aspect of climate change but doesn't really expand widely on the different causes and effects. This has been a program. School of Policy and Governance has been running in shorter formats and has been running in private settings, on invite only settings for various politicians and bureaucrats, and now they're going to open it up and make it a program that's available for everyone. I'm quite excited. I think it's the only type of program operating in the global south, and I'm sure it's like one of very few. So please sign up. It's already sold more than 15 seats, I'm told. There will be a nice little virtual batch of 20 students. I would recommend it highly. There's some amazing people speaking. Go check it out at policyandgovernance.in. Policyandgovernance.in. You will see the program right away when you land on the page. That's my heavy head.
Fantastic.
And let me add to that, Ruchir, that having seen and worked with you guys on this policy and School of Policy and Governance, I know how much effort you put in from the start, from the day you started this, and the first few sort of executive education programs we did together. A couple of days, 2 days, then virtually, and so on. So it's fantastic that you've built it up to the first diploma course with a good name in Indian university. So fantastic. And I know a bunch of overseas universities have also backed you and collaborated with you. So I think you've done fantastically well to be where you are. So well done, Ruchir. You never tell us all the great work you do at School of Policy and Governance anymore.
Very cool. Manu,
But
your turn next.
yeah, mine is quite different. Definitely very far from sports, but so one of the I thought I had this superpower, but somebody's also seems to have researched it and written about it in a book. So I've been reading this book called Originals by Adam Grant, and the superpower that I thought I had was when I met people within a few minutes, typically in a social setting, I would be able to guess whether they are a firstborn or a later born or a second or sometimes a very very younger one. And I've done this in many social settings, many nights out, many parties, and I think I'm quite good at it now after observing people for a while. But of course, in the book Originals, Adam Grant has sort of done some empirical study into this, and he says that firstborns usually tend to be more dominant, more ambitious, and more conscientious. They are like they observe rules really well, and they hate rule breaking. Whereas later borns are the ones who embrace original ideas and are huge risk takers. And in fact, that's something that contributes part of their personality trait, and that sort of helps them switch jobs frequently. They usually rise quicker in terms of salaries and whatnot, whereas the firstborns are sort of more happy to comply and very very obedient and so on. So I don't know if that matches your children's sort of behavior as well, but it's something for you all to think through.
Just
Someone told me, sorry, Mitali, someone told me, I thought it's funny, is that 90% of the people who get into Harvard are firstborns. I have not verified it, but anecdotally, friends who've been to Harvard, when like all of them that I know are all firstborns. I
Hmm.
don't know how true that is.
I just know that if it's the firstborn, and if the firstborn is a girl, like literally the entire family is scared of her. It's not just her younger siblings. Everyone is walking the line very carefully. But listen, boys, no cricket, no Andy Murray. I'm quite surprised, and I consciously kept my "Have you heard" separate from that. So I am going to go back to politics, but in an interesting way, which is that a large part of this whole political narrative in the UK over the last many years has been documented through the eyes of Larry the cat. And I don't know how many of you know about Larry the cat. So Larry the cat is a stray, and was sort of adopted by the government from an animal shelter in 2011, I think, and it's sort of cared for by the 10 Downing Street staff and collectively owned by everyone. And the funny bit was that somebody started a Twitter handle called number 10 cat. And then Larry the cat would start making jokes about how he had been around longer than, say, Liz Truss, when there was a shift of power now from Sunak to Starmer. There's that brief period when no one is in charge, and there was a selfie of Larry the cat saying, "I'm in charge for the next 3 minutes," things like that. But there's finally going to be competition because Tama and his family also own a rescue cat called Jojo. So now it's going to be sort of Jojo versus Larry. So it's quite interesting to see some of the new entrants into 10 Downing. That was my "Have you heard?"
It'd be a fun election to have cats run against each other. Maybe that's
Yeah,
what we need.
and cats
um,
are breed. Yeah.
Thank you for making it this far. We're at the end of the episode. I do have a flight to catch, so we're going to wrap up now. As always, you can write to us and give us feedback. We're super grateful. We do listen, we do read. You can email us at indiadialoguepodcast@gmail.com. We're all on Twitter, or now X, TID underscore podcast. TID is the India Dialogue, TID underscore podcast, or India Dialogue Podcast on YouTube. Manu is Manuraj1983 on Twitter. Mitali is at Mitali Live. I am at Ruchir underscore P. Thank you again for tuning in, and see you all next time. Bye.